Still not live, huh?
Okay. Swetaji, over to you. Yes, we are.
Namaste, everyone. I'm Shweta, and on behalf of Friends of India Society International UK, I would like to welcome all of you to our platform today. Let me begin with a brief introduction about FISI UK. FISI UK is a non-profit international NGO that aspires to be an influential voice on all matters related to India and the UK. It was established in April 1976 during the state of emergency in India, and it played a key role in creating an international forum advocating for the restoration of democracy in India. One of our primary objectives is to provide a platform for discussing various issues related to India. And in line with that objective, we are delighted to have you all here today for a candid discussion on, is the Western media and think tank hostile to India's rise? 2024 has just begun, and we have already seen some harsh pieces on India, such as the Guardian's article questioning India's sense of humor, the Foreign Policy magazine discussing the perceived decline of India's democracy, and the Journal of Democracy publishing a piece titled Hindu Nationalism and the New Jim Crow. This is not a new phenomenon. We have seen many such disparaging stories, be it on India's COVID handling or the BBC docu-series on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, or a myriad of pieces on India's democracy being in recession. In fact, a recent survey in the United Kingdom by Insight UK revealed that British media tends to depict Indians and Hindus in particular through the lens of cows, curry, and caste. Unfortunately, this unfavorable portrayal of India extends beyond media to think tanks, international institutions' rankings, and numerous indexes. So our conversation today will deconstruct whether Western NGOs, media, and think tanks exhibit hostility towards India, its rise, and its assertiveness. To help us dissect this, we have with us two expert geopolitical analysts, Chris Blackburn and Pathikrit Payne. To introduce them, Chris is a political analyst with a strong emphasis on counterterrorism and security. He has given numerous speeches in the UK Parliament for the All Parliamentary Group on Human Rights. He has also provided US Department of Justice briefings on counterterrorism, a recipient of a Friend of Bangladesh award from the government of Bangladesh for his work on counterterrorism and seeking justice for war crimes committed during the War of Liberation in 1971. He's also the head of the European outreach at Global Friends of Afghanistan, which is a US-based think tank that is working with Afghan figures around the world. Welcome, Chris. We are glad that you could join this conversation today. Chris has also penned a relevant article on this topic, and we look forward to hearing more on that. Our other panelist, Pathikrit ji, he's an alumnus of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He's also a geopolitical and strategic affairs analyst who has over 17 years of professional experience in policy analysis and journalism. He appears frequently on Indian television news media, including CNN News 18, Republic TV, NewsX, India Today, and India Ahead. He's a senior research fellow with Dr. Shyam Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation and has also written a pertinent paper on our topic of the day. A very warm welcome to you also, Pathikrit ji. Before we begin, a quick note to our viewers today. If you have any questions, please post them on the comment section of our YouTube live page wall. I would now request Pathikrit ji to share his initial thoughts on the subject.
Thank you, Shweta ji. Thank you, FISI UK, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm very honored to be here. So let me tell you my initial, understanding, and we have worked on a paper recently. We have titled it "The Ploy Behind the Plot" as to why there is a tendency for misleading extrapolation of data to pin down, a resurgent India under Prime Minister Modi. So, what is the objective behind it? Why is it that the West? I would not say the West in its entirety, but at least among the Western media, Western think tanks and NGOs, there is this perceptual habit of doing so. I think somewhere the media of the West works as a front of the deep state of most of the countries over there. So there is not much difference between what the deep state of those countries want and what the media of those countries actually project about India. The irony is this, that the industrial houses, the major corporations want something else from India. So they would say that India is doing great, but the media houses will show something very opposite of that. So it's like two hands working in paradoxically different approach. So before we get into why is it happening that way, and why is there a certain kind of desperation in the West today, they're trying to do more and more of this. I think somewhere the West actually wants India to grow. There's no doubt about it, because the growth of India, from their perspective, has a lot of intrinsic connection with, the West growth of West as well, because the Western markets beyond the point today is saturated. China is a one-way traffic. You invest there, you don't get something back. So they're looking for Indian growth perspective, something as a positive thing. But at the same time, in many of the think tanks and international studies institutes of the West, there is this whisper going on that today's problem is India, today's problem is China, tomorrow's problem will be India. Why is it so? It's so because they think that India is growing too big to be controlled tomorrow. So what do they want out of India is something we must understand first. They don't want India to collapse. They want India to grow, but they want India somewhere in between. A country which will not collapse like Pakistan, but which will not become completely beyond control like China. So they want India to be externally stable, but internally in chaos. And that's why you would find these reports which are brought out, and there are elements within India as well who pick up these reports without getting into the depth of those, and try to project, oh my God, look at what India is doing. Oh my God, see what the condition of India is. And that's where what happened is that for a long time, the culture or the philosophy of karma in India, that you do good things and good things will happen to you. There is this realization in the last few years, it doesn't happen that way. You need to do the good work, and you need to control the narrative also. The problem for the West is, because of the proliferation of social media, there was a time when everything coming from the West was considered as gospel, that if the West is saying it, it must be true. But today that illusion has been broken. So there are counterpoints coming up time and again, questioning the West. And so the Western media today is wondering, all including the likes of George Soros, and I'm taking his name particularly, I'll tell you the reasons, that in spite of what we do, in spite of how much we try to pin down the government, why is it that people still vote for Prime Minister Modi? This is something they're not being able to crack. This is an enigma for them. The reality is that India today, beyond the point, doesn't get two hoots about what the West writes, and that's why they keep on writing ever more. Why I wrote this paper, and I will request Madhureshji to share the link of that. It's a 40-page paper we have written. So look at what has happened in the last 3 years. And let me tell you, what India does is far more challenging for the government of India than probably for any of the Western European countries, because India's population is not, say, 140 million, it is 1.4 billion. 1.4 billion, which means anything you do, you need to do 10 to 20 times more than what many of the European countries have to do. So from 2020 onwards, please understand this, and this is so very important for people to realize. Then when COVID struck India or the rest of the world, we did not even have the capacity to make PPE kits or N95 masks. All were being imported. In 3 years' time, 3 months' time, we became the second largest manufacturer of both. And we started exporting. So in the last 3 years, what the government of India has done is this. I'll give you statistics. It has given 200 crore plus vaccines to people of India free of cost. It has given 800 million people additional free ration. so that nobody dies of starvation because of the lockdowns and post-pandemic challenges. It has gone ahead and given vaccines to 100 more other countries, often free of cost. It had worked on supply chain resilience to ensure that the post-pandemic supply chain problems because of China, which was happening, doesn't happen again. It has worked on Atmanirbhar Bharat to create a resilient supply chain within the country. And at a time when majority of the countries of the West are on the verge of recession, India emerged as the fifth largest economy with a $600 billion foreign exchange reserve, with a $750 billion export, with a target of $2 trillion export by 2030. And at the same time, last 3 years, even during the peak of the pandemic, we had to get prepared for almost fighting a war with China. And because of which IMF comes up and says that they have defined India as a bright spot in a dark horizon. And then you have a ridiculous hunger index which comes up and say India's condition is worse than that of Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So they thought people will believe it. Now I think all of us have seen in Pakistan, for one sack of rice or wheat, food grain rather, 12 people are jostling and fighting with each other. It became so very viral. In the middle of the pandemic, Sri Lanka had a major economic crisis. The only country which came up, and not the multilateral institutions, the only country which came up while managing its own challenges, gave Sri Lanka $4 billion worth of food grain, medicines, basic necessities, fuel. Shipload after shipload was India. And then we are told to believe, we are asked to believe that India's economic, from food hunger perspective, India is worse than that of Sri Lanka. We have given $800 million people additional free ration. There's not a single incident of anybody dying of starvation. And they thought that we will believe it. The reality of today is India has evolved. People laughed it off, except certain foreign funded news portals. This is the transformation that has happened, which is not, that is what I say is enigma, because the Western NGOs who thought that I will control the narrative in India. So there was this perception, governments might change, but the NGOs will control the narrative. The West will control the narrative. The West will decide what is good for us. It is no more happening. The presumption that India must perpetually keep on importing is not going to happen anymore. Atmanirbhar Bharat is something which is hitting many countries, let me tell you, and that's why this is happening. So I'll go in details later on, but this is my core point, that it is not that West doesn't want India to grow. They want India to grow, but they want India to grow on their terms. If they shake hands with us, they expect us to believe and accept that the West's enemies will be India's enemy and West's friend will be India's friend. It is not going to happen like that. And let me tell you, if India had not defied the Western sanctions, and if we had not continued buying oil from Russia, we would have been in the same recession where European Union has already entered. So my last point before I hand over, Dr. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, made a statement. In Europe, he said that Europe must come out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. When terrorism strikes United States, the world is expected to come and say, we have to all go for war against terror. But when terrorism strikes India, they're called gunmen in the West. They're not even called terrorists. And till date, United States, United Nations has not even defined the definition of what is terrorism. Because we keep on pushing for that, because we keep on pushing for multilateral institutions reforms under Prime Minister Modi, because we are talking about Global South and their aspirations and what is important for them as well, that today, suddenly you see that NGOs are very active and saying, oh my God, this country is going down. Democracy in India, where 1.4 billion people go to vote. And this is a country where there has been absolutely seamless transfer of power, irrespective of whichever party. And for that, all political parties must be appreciated. You don't find litigations as it happens in United States. You don't find street fights happening. I will not give up power. Our democracy, where you have last mile connectivity, even if there is one voter in one hill atop, you would have an election commission officer going there with the ballot box and making sure that he gets the right to vote. Can you imagine the level of operation that happened? During the COVID also, it's not that the vaccines that only saved India. India's food culture, the immunity that it develops, India's culture of being with everybody, the neighborhoods, the families worked and helped each other to ensure, because there was a presumption in the West that the Western infrastructure of healthcare is better than India. So in India, 25 crore will suffer, 10 crore will die. It didn't happen that way. It happened the other way around. Africa was absolutely the least impacted, interestingly. And no one was giving vaccine to anybody. There was vaccine hoarding going on. India was the only country which was going out and giving vaccines. And India did not import a single vaccine. That created a lot of problem among the pharma lobbies. How dare India does not import vaccines from us? And since we were giving out free vaccines, we become a betanoir for a lot of countries. And then the NGOs started writing that India's democracy is failing. Okay, if this is the definition of failure, we would love to fail time and again. But the fundamental issue is this: India is actually questioning a lot of status quo. And that is making a lot of people feel a little rattled. If you don't import vaccines, if you start making your own weapon systems, if you start defying oil cartels and buy oil at your own terms, if you try to be Atmanirbhar and think about making everything on your country, then invariably the likes of George Soros would be unhappy. And if your regime change games that you tried to play in Ukraine and Middle East, you tried in India, it didn't work out, then you're unhappy. That means Indians are no more democratic. But the problem is, we have developed a skin now. We have our own problems. It's not that we are a country without problems, but we know to deal with it and we don't need sermons anymore. So that is the transformation, and that's why you see, I'm sorry I'm taking a little more time, the Papua New Guinea president touched the feet of Prime Minister of India. Why? Because when nobody was giving vaccine, it was India who went ahead and gave vaccines to everybody. It was Prime Minister Modi's decision. You cannot have a world where half the people are dead without vaccines. We were the only country which went. We were the first country to go and help Turkey when, unfortunately, Europe and NATO was busy funding the Ukraine war. And we don't have the best of relation with Turkey because of the Turkey stand on Kashmir policy. But when it comes to humanitarian issue, the Prime Minister was very clear, nothing doing, we must do. So as the first respondent to Turkey, helping Sri Lanka when no one else helped, and the Sri Lankan crisis was the outcome of the culture of sanctions of the West. I'll come to that later. But this is the transformation which unfortunately many people are not liking, because the status quo is being questioned, and that's why India is very bad. But we have seen those games so many times in the past that now it no more reacts, nobody cares. Indians keep on smiling, and some of them actually give it back on Twitter. So we are considered people with not much humor. But surprisingly, a country where they say there's no humor, people are sad. It's a country where so many people from the West comes in search of spiritual peace because material wealth have not given them what they're looking for. It's an irony. So the questions are being asked. That's why the mental slavery is over. And that's why suddenly we are so bad among the... So I'm sure it has happened with many other countries, but it's okay. So that's the transformation. It doesn't mean that all people of West are bad. There are very good people. There are very big, great friends of India. But I think India is simply asking that it can't be all the time that your problem is my problem, but my problem is not your problem. I give it back to Sweta now.
Thank you, Pathikrit ji, for sharing some of very pertinent facts and very positive thoughts. I would now request Chris to share his initial thoughts.
Hi, thank you, Sweta, and thank you, FISI, for having me on today to discuss this pertinent topic, which I feel whether I'm tweeting or writing about it, this topic, about the hostility towards India, I think is one of the most important issues that the globe faces. And I think Pathikrit's points about the transformation, what we're basically looking at here is a transformation in Europe and North America. This sort of unipolar world is now transforming into a multipolar world. in India's rise is becoming a major part of that new transformation on the geopolitical stage. So I think what in the United States, when they look at India, they see it through many different lenses. They see it through a sort of a national security lens. They see it through the human rights and democracy lens. And I think sometimes when journalists are picking up things, and I think Pathikrit was right to say that, there are some people who are pushing narratives on India that are simply false. The likes of George Soros has put a lot of effort into going after Prime Minister Modi because he has a personal dislike for him, and I think we see these sort of narratives playing out, and it's done through lots of different things in the United States. We see the sort of the Indian Muslim American Council, who pushes sort of Jamaat positions. They've sort of got a monopoly on how India is seen in the human rights context in the United States, and a lot of groups are using their work with a lot of people who I would actually consider to be Hindu-phobic, and who don't see that the rise of sort of the BJP in India has been a sort of a conservative movement, but as a religious one. So these people are twisting narratives on India, and I think it's very unfair. And as we see, there's a lot of backlash in India who say, well, listen, all we want at the end of the day is for Western journalists and think tanks to be fair. We'll take it on the chin. Like, if you can be objective and give us a sort of a fair hearing, then fine, we'll take things on the chin. But it's not happening. People feel that India isn't getting the sort of the right crack of the whip, as they say. But I do think as I've written on this issue, I do feel that there's a lot of press who are either too lazy. It's down to laziness rather than malice that drives them on a lot of these topics. And my article, I picked on, probably unfairly, I picked on Ben Wright at the Telegraph, where he wrote an article basically saying the red flags in India, there's a potential genocide on the horizon, which is absolute nonsense. Muslims are actually voting for the BJP in record numbers, and it's rising. Why is that? Because they see the BJP as being a conservative party. So you have all these crazy dynamics, and I think that Indian analysts say, well, why can't Western analysts pick up on that? Why can't they give us a fair hearing on multiple subjects? So I think, looking at the situation, I feel there are elements who are certainly hostile to India, but I think on balance, there's quite a lot of sectors, especially in the United States and Europe, who see India's rise as being a good thing. And if this multipolar world, which we can't put the brakes on, the USA can't put the brakes on that. They're going to have to get used to India being a bigger player. So I think that there's elements in the State Department, in the Pentagon, who see India as being this massive strategic partner, and it will be a good thing. And I think personally that India's approach to world affairs will have a good effect for Europe. And I think we've seen with President Macron, I think he gave a speech in Dhaka on basically regional politics, and he said the same thing. And it was basically, you could have copied and pasted his speech with Dr. Jaishankar's, and he basically said, we've got to look at other people's problems and not be as sort of self-centered as we have in the past. And I think there are elements in the United States who, especially in the State Department, who are taking that on board. However, this sector, who I said are hostile to India, haven't really got with the program, and it'll be interesting to see how they develop it going forward. So all these little articles that are coming out in the usual suspects, we have the Guardian, then the New York Times, the Economist, and the Financial Times, and then you have all the sort of the feeders around it, the Deutsche Welles and all the others in Europe and North America. We are seeing that there's critical articles on India, but I don't think there's any that are openly hostile and saying that they want to see a sort of a regime change in India. So I think it's between malice and just laziness on behalf of Western media and in the think tank world. I think that they are going to have to start getting with the program, and I think it's why dialogue is the most important thing going forward. And Prathikrit, I mean, that view is wide. It's wide in India, and especially it's even in sections of Congress. That view that we're not getting a fair crack of the whip, you're not being fair to India, and that is it's a genuine concern. And I think going forward, we all need to address it. And I think we in the West are way too self-centered. We click our fingers here and there, especially when we look at, say, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We expected India to basically do what we wanted them. We wanted them to line up behind us, and that was never ever going to happen. And that was a complete disrespect of India's bilateral ties with Russia, who've had fantastic ties over the years. But we can't expect India to just drop all of that because there's this Quad security dialogue. We've got to basically have respect for India's position in the world. And it's been in a very difficult, dangerous world, and India's had the sort of the flexibility and sometimes ambiguity to be able to deal with an effective neighborhood, and it has risen as a result of all of those challenges that India's faced over the years. It's managed to come out of that and be a more confident nation as a result. So I think we need to praise India rather than picking it to bits as we do. But then if we're to say, well, India has sort of hostile intentions towards us, and every nation does. Like India, I see it on Indian Twitter all the time. People say about how the US President Biden is his mental decline, and how America is basically falling and receding in power. So it works both ways. India's got to expect, if we're going to criticize the United States and its politics or European politics, well, that's just life. We've got everybody. So it's but understanding the problems that exist, the fundamentals, which I think is unfairness. We see our problems as, we try to project our problems onto India, which is what Dr. Shankar said. We've got to get the balance right going forward if we're going to have these strategic partnerships. And I hope that ties blossom in the future, and that basically, and I say it time and time again, is that I hope to see the US becoming more humble, and that India becomes more assertive, and that partnership going forward is going to shape the globe, whether we like it or not. We're basically it's being forged in fire, and it will be tested in future. But I think on the hostility act, we know the players who are involved in it, and I think ultimately it's about respect, and that's what we need to do in future. We need to respect, and we need to know that India's rise will have a positive effect for the rest of the world. It'll rise the boats in the global south, and we've got to really understand that India's to be respected and applauded for that.
Thank you, Chris, for those very interesting initial remarks. You put forth some very candid points. If I can also add that the recent Pew Research revealed that a fifth of Indian Muslims vote for the BJP. So let me ask my first question to Pathikrit ji. Pathikrit ji, in your report, you discuss this perceived biases in various indices evaluating India, like the Hunger Index, the Press Freedom Index, the Democracy Index, etc. So if you could, just elaborate for us on why you believe that these rankings of India are misleading and inaccurate.
So thank you, Shwetaji. I'll just, before I go to your question, I'll just add one thing to what Chris mentioned and what I stated earlier. The irony is, what we ask in India is this, that look, if your NGOs and media think, I mean, your means the Western, not you particularly, but if the Western media thinks India is so bad, then why are the Western countries and Western companies jostling with each other to invest in India? You can invest somewhere else. You can invest in Pakistan. You can invest in Afghanistan. But you are in a hurry to come here to sign off deals. Secondly, purely if you look at from the perspective of, that's where I'll come to the Hunger Index. The Tatas gave an order for 470 aircraft in June 2022. 470 aircraft, of which I think 250 was for Airbus and 220 was for Boeing. And the American president came on record during the signing virtually, and he said it would create 1 million jobs in the United States because of this one particular order. That means India's growth is actually helping them in creating jobs as well, because India has a huge potential of growth. No denial that our per capita income is much less than what it is in the other countries, Western countries. So we accept and we move on that way. Now, if you look at the hunger index, I'll come to the rest of the points later. So the hunger index, the project that India's ranking, if you look at it, it is 111 in 2023, and it was 107 in 2022. It was worse than Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan. With no disrespect to anybody, almost 90% of what Nepal imports come from India. A large number of Nepalis work in India. I mentioned Sri Lanka was almost bankrupt. Everything went from India. Now, if you look at the details of the question, then you realize the devil is in the details. So where does the conflict rise, and why India actually, we came out with a rebuttal and then there was no answer from the other side. I'll tell you what the question was asked. A country of 1.4 billion people, you know how many people they went to ask questions for this report on global hunger index? The Gallup World Poll went and asked questions to 3,000 people to define hunger of a 1.4 billion people population. Now look at the question. One of the 8 questions was this: during the last 12 months, was there a time when, because of lack of money or other resources, you were worried? It has nothing to do with reality, that you are worried you would not have enough food to eat, and you ate less than what you thought you would eat. Okay. Now, so in India, what happens? You define or judge how much nutrients you require in terms of per capita dietary energy supply. Okay, they didn't ask about that. Now, it may happen that you get 3 meals a day of 4 chapatis and 4 rotis, but you want to have an exotic meal. You want to order online, and then you realize that I want to eat, but I don't have money to order from a 5-star hotel. So that means I am not good enough. Or I want to munch on snacks throughout the day, that in any case is harmful, but I don't have the money to do it. So that means I am deprived in this country. And in a country where actually money doesn't matter when it comes to food availability, because for 800 million people, the government is giving additional free ration from 2020 onwards, and it's still continuing, in addition to what you are already committed under National Food Security Act. Which means even if you don't have money, even if hypothetically you still would have at your home, on an average of a family of 5 people, minimum 15 to 20 kgs of food given to you by the government of the country. So where does hunger come? Are you getting my point? It has nothing to do with hunger. Now I want to have Italian pizza, and I want to have French, some champagne, and then I can't afford. Of course, the government can't give it to you. Then you have to earn money. So this is where the issue comes. Secondly, now if you go to, I'll go to the other part. It is in details. I'll not go that much into details. So on the issue of media report, they came out with something called press freedom. Okay, they ranked India very low in press freedom. I'll take one example to tell you, to make people understand the hypocrisy that is going on. So there was a raid on BBC premises, and it created a lot of controversy, that how dare you raid BBC, as if BBC is above everybody. BBC is not, it can't be held accountable. BBC is next to God. Okay, so BBC is BBC. BBC can only be judged by BBC. That is a perception. Now it was purely about evasion of taxes. So it was created as if that BBC will be shut down. BBC still is going on. There are programs available right now. As we are doing this program, anyone can, watch BBC Hindi, and they keep on coming out with the trash they want to do. That's their choice. I mean, that's the beauty of Indian democracy also. The issue is, if there are allegations of tax evasion in a sovereign country, does the law enforcement agencies not have the right to go and ask that, please show us your documents? And we have a very, very, very independent judiciary system where the law enforcement agents will have to prove it. Otherwise, they will be acquitted and exonerated with honor. Right? There was an issue about a news portal called NewsClick. NewsClick is a typical, not just a typical leftist, propaganda portal, but it is totally funded by China through a person called Neville Roy Singham, based in United States, which gave this organization 38 crore, 380 million rather, in terms of dollar. I don't know how much it is, but it's quite a bit, more around $50 million. The government is asking this organization that you are saying this money you have got as remittance for a service. What is the service? And then you keep on peddling. If you see the pattern of what they have done in terms of reporting, objective is simple. They went through the emails to find out that the objective of this portal is only to promote China and pin down India. Instructions were given. Now, it created a lot of hype. There was a France 24 English channel which came out and asked lots of questions. They tried to show that Indian government and there's no press freedom. This is what they tried to project. Among the people who were on the payroll and shareholders of this entity called NewsClick was a person called Gautam Navlakha. This guy is known for his connections with ISI. And it has been said in the court, this guy is known for all kinds of anti-national activities, and several cases are going on against him. People can search it out. Now, in United Kingdom, if their authorities can ban CGTN because of the connection with communist regime of China, if the European Union can ban transmission by Sputnik and Russia Today, then on what basis they would ask a sovereign country like India that why are they taking actions? I mean, why did you ban Sputnik? Because you didn't want the other side of the story to be told, right? There is always another side of the story. Now, if you do that, see, as a country, let me tell you, whether it is good or bad, the government never questions the internal affair of another country. We do not. It is the prerogative of government of United Kingdom to decide what is good for and bad for them. But the same should be applicable to us. It cannot be that we are always to be judged by Europe. It cannot happen. So if Europe doesn't want, if UK cannot allow a channel to operate in China, in United Kingdom, because it has a shareholding and connection with communist regime of China, then on what basis they say that you cannot take action against NewsClick? When there are evidence, and again, this evidence will be proved has to be proved in a court of law. This is a democratic country, and those who are defending the accused, they have the right to hire the best of the lawyers to fight the case as well. Nobody would threaten them on that. But does, as a country, India not have that same rights which UK think or European countries think that they have? That is the issue. Now, let me tell you, here was this entire press freedom thing comes out by it is brought out by an organization called Reporters Sans Frontiers, RSF, and on World Press Freedom Index, Dr. Dan Steinbock, he says something. He says this, and it came out on The Street, portal on May 25, 2021. He states that for years, the Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders, RSF, has been widely quoted, even though its methodology is biased, and RSF was long led by a white supremacist with a penchant for US-led regime change. It is not an Indian saying it. Now RSF is targeting in Asia. So there was this problem, Shwetaji, when the challenges and the problems started between India and China. There was this presumption in the West that now that India is having problem with China, now they will come into our fold. So they will do what we want them to do. But I think somewhere they made a mistake because, again, we want good relation with everyone. We have very good friends in the West as well. What India did is this: we refused to be Asia's Ukraine. Okay? This is not my job. This is not our job. If we have a problem with China, we will do it on our own way. If the Chinese have not yet done anything beyond the point, because they know India has capacity to defend itself, not because somebody else will come to fight India's war, and nobody will come. And India also made it very clear, Dr. Jaishankar did make mention that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has a lot of other aspects to it. One of this, is NATO's expansion. Why do you need the expansion of NATO when the Cold War is over? NATO was a Cold War creation. Cold War is over, Warsaw Pact is over, you must be over. You can't keep on expanding and create an adversary. And the moment you want any kind of dialogue to settle down things, you want a conflict to end. If you want a conflict to end, you have to listen to both sides. You cannot have a conflict ending when you already have termed one side as an aggressor. Because you have created a situation where the other side doesn't, have no option, perhaps. I mean, I don't think the Americans would talk about freedom and democracy if the Russians were to set up a military base in Canada. That's a reality. We know what happened during the Cuban crisis and what the reaction of the Americans were. So again, America has every right to defend itself, but that right, everybody else has. So, I mean, we are not a country of Zelensky's. That's the reality. And that's perhaps where some people got upset with us, that how dare, you can have an independent foreign policy. Yes, we do have an independent foreign policy. Yes, we had our own share of problems. We are not a country where everything is perfect, Shwetaji. I mean, of course. And we have gone through several churnings. We have gone through invasions. We had problems. We live in a difficult neighborhood. So it's very difficult, to accept when everybody else judges us without understanding. And let me tell you, when people talk about secularism, that, these things keep on saying, the fact that India, in spite of facing 30 years of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, from Islamist terror organizations based in Pakistan, the fact that in spite of everything, that we have kept faith in secularism, it itself has to be respected, honored by everyone. Some landmark projects of Prime Minister Modi, and which are classical examples and template of how welfare should reach the last person. The JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan Aadhar Yojana. Before Prime Minister Modi came to power, less than 50% people in this country had access to banking. The Jan Dhan Yojana was about ensuring every family gets a bank account. Today, 99.9% Indians have a bank account, families. They were connected with Aadhar, which is a kind of a unique identification number, and then it was connected to the mobile number. Then what we did as a country was that DBT, direct benefit transfer, which means you are a beneficiary of any welfare scheme, the money directly goes to your bank account. There is no intermediary. You know how much India saved by that in the last 8 years? $27 billion. Because intermediaries were done away with. The entire COVID system was with a COVID app. You don't get a paper. It's a paperless system that we created, ensuring everybody, till the last man, somewhere in the remotest of India, gets access to a vaccine. Can you imagine the logistical operation that went through it? So when it comes, and then we had a scheme called Mudra. Mudra is a classic scheme. If I'll just give 1 minute to give a background. As we are moving towards industrial automation and artificial intelligence is being used more and more, organized industry, there's a limitation of how many jobs can be created. It's a limitation. So you need to create livelihood rather than jobs. Under that scheme, under Mudra, what government has done is this. I'll give in rupee. If you can convert, if somebody wants, I can show you the paper also. That's written in my paper. 44 crore loans were given in the last 8 years. How much money was given? Almost like 26 lakh crore, which is almost near to $300 billion. You know what we have created? We have created 80 million entrepreneurs. Grassroots level, people who were working somewhere took a loan, because the biggest problem for middle class and lower middle class is lack of availability of capital. So whether it is this, or whether it is connecting 100 million rural women through self-help groups, or whether it is for housing scheme, or whether it is giving money for Startup India, we have the third largest ecosystem for startups in the world. I want to challenge all the NGOs, show one example of anybody, or whether it is giving additional free ration to 800 million people, to show one example of one person having been discriminated on the basis of caste, creed, or religion. If you cannot give an example of any discrimination on religion on that matter, then on what basis you say that discrimination is happening in India and Muslims have been deprived? In fact, the majority of the beneficiaries on these schemes are actually Muslims. And that's why you see there's a perceptual difference between what is being narrated from the West and what is happening in ground. That's the reason. So what has happened is that what is being done now is not something which is happening for the first time. But the only difference is that today the West is being countered. That is something that there's a very major company which has been targeted by George Soros, right? And we all know that. You know why that company is being targeted? Unfortunately, the Western media would try to project, if somebody is an American entrepreneur, he's a philanthropist, he is great, he is, he's gift to the world. But if there is an entrepreneur, an industrialist from India, then he is anti-poor, anti-people, he's a crony, which means you do not want. And then you have NGOs pushing that narrative. You create an environment, trigger people to protest and shut down companies. And then you say, look, all this is being done for the sake of poor people, because you want, beyond the point, developing countries to remain dependent on imports. You do not want them to be, absolutely self-reliant. And when it is no more working, because some of the major companies which are being targeted by the likes of George Soros are working on development of what you can call infrastructural capability for the next 10 years or 15 years of India. Ports, airports, massive infrastructure development happening in India to expand the capacity of Indian economy to absorb investments. And that is not something lot many people are liking. So Washington Post, and I'm naming, Washington Post is one of the biggest critics, owned by Jeff Bezos, Amazon, whose biggest competition in India comes from Reliance. So invariably, some of the likes of Washington Post have not been very favorable towards Indian industrials. Now, Chris talked about whether regime change thing is being done or not. Look, let me tell you one thing. India's democracy, of course, is too resilient to be, totally challenged, but there have been efforts. The Citizenship Amendment Act. The Citizenship Amendment Act has had nothing to do with taking away with anybody's citizenship. It was all about the persecuted minorities from rest of South Asia, to give them a chance to get Indian citizenship 5 years ahead of the stipulated time, to those who came till 2014, who are those terribly persecuted minorities of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Either they were either they were Christians, or they were Sikhs, or they were Hindus or Buddhists. And a narrative was built. And if you see the Western media articles that time, when the anti-CA protest was going on, it was very different than the reality. The farm law protest that happened, it's known that money came from abroad for that. The farm law reforms were all meant to give the farmers direct access to the market by doing away with the intermediaries. Because the intermediaries take away all the money, the farmer doesn't get anything. That's the reality of farming in India. The reforms would have benefited the same farmers who are today regretting that, those farm reforms did not come. But when the farm reforms were brought in, an environment was created as if, India government is anti-people. So I think somewhere what is good for the West should be good for the Asian countries also. It cannot be that in your country you do something, then it is fine. But if we try to reform certain things, then it is bad. There have been so many protests in a country like France because a lot of reforms they're bringing in. We don't comment on that. That's an internal affair. But we want the Asian country, European countries to reciprocate the same. The reciprocation simply do not happen. How can a country like Pakistan, which is a hotbed of terrorism, can so easily come out of the Financial Action Task Force grey list? Because there was a war going on in Ukraine and you needed Pakistan all over again. So I think we can understand a lot of things that is happening. The reality also, Shwetaji, today is this, that for a long time, the average Indian was away from any interest in geopolitics. Today, thanks to social media, they take a lot of active interest. And they're questioning a lot of things, including the likes of democracy index. In the democracy index, the surprising thing is that many of the countries, who have been ranked ahead of India are either bankrupt or had civil wars, completely involved in chaos. But as per the democracy index, they are far better off than India. The question then is this, that those who sponsor those indexes, why are those companies so interested in investing in India? Why don't you go somewhere in Somalia and invest if you find that country is better off than India? The question is this, these issues were never raised. Today, the same questions are being raised. You go and invest in Somalia. Go and invest in Sudan. Who stops you from investing in Yemen? Shake hands with the Houthis and invest there. So from strategic perspective, you say something, but from economic perspective, then you prostrate in front of the Indian government.
Absolutely.
I just hand over.
No, absolutely, Pathikrit ji. I mean, it's quite shocking to see deliberate disregarding of some of the key facts and the positive that you mentioned, and largely driven by economic interest and maybe ideological driven biases. So, Chris, if I can, come to you now. Some experts argue that the Western media, which Pathikrit ji also touched upon, it kind of aligns with the foreign policy establishments, and it kind of furthers the Western foreign policy objectives. For instance, painting India as a fundamentalist and a genocidal nation while ignoring the Western societal issues on the same scale. So if I can illustrate that with an example, a 2019-20 Pew Research survey revealed that 24% of Muslims in India feel discriminated against. And the same survey says that in the US, 80% of African Americans, 46% of Hispanics, and 40% of Asian Americans report feeling discriminated against. But is America being called xenophobic? No. So how do you respond to this observation?
Well, I think on that very question, I think I'd actually turn it around. I think a lot of nations are saying that America is bigoted, and that there's quite startling things happening. I mean, we saw like Tucker Carlson, one of the biggest broadcasters in America. He was platforming Amy Wax, who was saying some horrific things about India. So I think in the United States and even recently with the Gaza conflict, we've seen sort of hard right Christian right wingers saying some horrific things about Jews, about making blood libels, saying that Jews were somehow kidnapping people in New York, and these were people with like over 500,000 followers, like massive, and they've got their own sort of news networks now. So I think that side of things in America, people are saying America is moving in directions that we don't want it to move. So I think it's sort of undermined the questions. So sorry about it, but it is, and I think we do have to have the media does have to have these dialogues to a certain degree. So we've got to sort of take it on our chins in a way. Like if a Western journalist says something bad about India, like I would say, well, yeah, if you're gonna point out a challenge or a problem, or like at least be balanced about it. Like give everybody a fair shake of the whip. And it's the fact is that it isn't. People are deliberately targeting India for sort of political gains. And I think that's ultimately the problem. But I think when you look at every sector and as I say, Western, I mean, North America and Europe are very different when it comes to India and how they perceive it. I think there's a lot of more positivity in Europe about India being a rising star. And a lot of people want to get, as Pathikrit said, people want to get in on the ground floor and help India invest, get involved in infrastructure projects and share in the sort of the growth and the wealth. So I think you've got that side of things, but then there's this tiny minority, like in the media, who see things in poor narratives and are constantly wanting to sort of pick India apart, and I think it's very unfair and it's driven by malice. And I'm not going to defend anyone from that because we know it's there. We've seen all the cases. As you've said, and as we've mentioned in this discussion, there's people who are saying like India's lost its sense of humor. Like what kind of where would that article come from? And I think the Guardian for saying that kind of thing, it's just malice. I think if anything, India's got quite a vibrant democracy. It's got a vibrant satire, and humor is probably one of the best things that comes out of India. The ability, and humor is basically built on the ability to switch things around or look at something from a different perspective, and that's what makes things funny. And I think in India, that culture of being free and looking at things in a sort of a cynical way it is good for democracy ultimately. So where the Guardian suddenly decided to come out of pull this article out of thin air is a worrying sign. But I think as long as people are out there discussing it and challenging it, for me that's a good thing. But as we've seen in the past, when people do challenge it, they say, "Oh, this is Hindutva," or it's like a pack mentality picking on journalists. But journalists need to be challenged. I think that's part of democracy. It's part of a free press. If you can get on social media and say, "Hey, I've got a problem with A, B, and C," like if a journalist is worried about that, you're in the wrong profession. Like at the end of the day, and I think in India. And I have lots of friends in Congress, and I have lots of friends in the BJP. I think, and they worry that the Western, certain sections of the Western press are so unbelievably biased against India that it's frightening. And hopefully, I think this is a dying part of the sort of the legacy press in the West, in that there'll be fresher things come forward as sort of the and media is changing. There's so much transformation happening in the world. Like we've got social medias overtaking the old legacy press. We've got politics is in a turmoil within the United States and Europe, and we've got all these sort of new populist parties, and everybody's sort of shifting. So I think what out of that process, hopefully, there'll be a lot more fairer and a lot more humble politics comes out of the West.
Absolutely, Chris. If I can just also add, like 12 states in India are governed by a different party than the one in the center. So and as well as Pathikrit ji had said, that there is like, large states have switched from ruling party to different party, and that has been a smooth transition. So it just shows how democracy is thriving in India. Pathikrit ji, coming to you. In your report, you reference Professor Salvatore Babons, the American sociologist who criticized the democracy indices by Freedom House, Viram Institute, and the Economist Intelligence Unit for downgrading India. But he also mentions the elite Indian intellectuals who kind of provide inputs to these rating agencies and, thus contribute to this distorted narrative about the country. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think for a long time, and it has a lot to do with the legacy of the British rule in India, that unless you tend to project yourself as culturally immune and away from India, you will not be considered elite. That has been the problem with the Indian elite psyche for a long time, and that is one of the leftover things of the British Raj, but that's changing. So I think most of these, those who make these indexes, it's not that they're going out and doing a survey across, say, 1 lakh Indians across the country. They go to whom they think, know it within brackets. They are sitting in many other places So what happens? Suppose like this: somebody writes an article, and let me tell you this: I have faced this. There are certain Western media houses who would tell you that would you like to contribute, and I'm not naming those houses, but and they qualify it by saying that you have to write against the government. Unless, if you don't write against the government, then you cannot write. It is, so that is the level where that disdain is there. So somebody who somebody sitting in United States or some of the European countries, he or she is being told that write something on India, and he or she for her career writes as she is being told. Person B, who wants to then write something on India, refers to that same very article and then writes her own piece. So this whole chain that has been created of so-called intellectuals who are being time and again referred to while writing something about India. And that's where the problem is, because most of these intellectuals, so-called intellectuals, have themselves lost connect with what's happening in India. That's one. Secondly, I will again say to Chris, I agree completely. It is not that the whole of West is against us. It's not so. And I think the West itself is not united, because there are different fissures within each country. There are different blocks. So Salvatore Babones actually came and gave a very brilliant, he had deliberations in India about this whole thing about democracy. If you say, as a country in terms of nominal per capita GDP, India is somewhere around $2,500 per person. We are perhaps the only country in the world which is a vibrant democracy and still has a per capita GDP less than $10,000, because it doesn't happen otherwise. Most of the other so-called democracies have very high per capita income, and that's where I think they fail to understand India, I would rather say. And that's where the issue of culture comes. Why they tend to target the culture of India by terming it as a Hindutva. So let me tell you, these economic crises that have become legacy of globalization. Every 5-10 years something happens. What happens in India is this very interesting thing. So the son loses the job, the son can call up the father, and the father says, "You've lost the job, doesn't matter, come back home." So the home consists of his father, his uncles. You have a joint family, and the support system that person gets in spite of having lost his job is something so very unique. That's why you don't have that level of bankruptcies ever in families in India, because the family as a whole is supporting you. That same thing is being translated as, the cultural aspect cannot be accepted. There has been this whole tussle going on during G20 also, and the Prime Minister of India again mentioned, you cannot have growth, development without taking into account the importance of culture. I'll tell you why culture is so very important. And this is something again Salvatore Babones have all the time mentioned, where the West failed to understand India. As I mentioned about vaccine, also the COVID pandemic, also look at United States, a great country, no doubt. It has had phenomenal growth. It's the most powerful country, one of the biggest in terms of GDP, $26 trillion. But why is it that a country like United States, having so much of wealth, you have a situation where somebody at the age of 24, 25 lives alone with 20 guns and 10 dogs, completely cut off from the family, and then one day, tired of drugs and video games, goes out with a gun and shoots down 10 odd children or 20 odd children in a school, and you have a situation where parents are contemplating to send their kids to school wearing bulletproof jackets. If it happens in a sub-Saharan African country, one can understand. Why does it happen in United States? What's the problem with that entire growth metrics, that your growth eventually is giving rise to suicides? And let me tell you this, these indexes which keep on saying that the best countries in the world in terms of happiness, this, that, are the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries at the same time are very high in the index when it comes to suicides. So the issue is this, that culture plays a very critical role in development of a country. And if you take away culture and you only have economic growth, it doesn't work. And unfortunately, the wokeism thing that is coming from the West is something that is trying to create the same thing in India. That's where they keep on targeting the cultural aspect. Because if somebody is culturally integrated with his own country, and let me tell you, culture has nothing to do with religion beyond a point. Culturally, people can be, attuned to the country, irrespective of whichever religion they come from or adhere to. So what's happening in India is this, that there was this happiness index, that people in India are very unhappy. How do you define happiness? That's the question. Now, if somebody say at the age of 24 or 25 in India works very hard, he has a job, but he works very hard for a better job. He goes to school, to his office, comes back, doesn't go to party on the Friday nights or Saturdays, does his rituals, does fasting, spends time with family, with his cousins, saves money for the future to start his own business, doesn't have a credit card, doesn't go out and have alcohol, doesn't party. Does that mean that person is unhappy? So the definitions that have been created, or the templates or the benchmark of how you define a democracy is good, how you define somebody is unhappy or happy, how you define what humor is, how you define press freedom, these are being questioned. I'll give you an example. There was an incident in Kashmir, and that there was a long phase of terrorism that state faced, cross-border terrorism. There was somebody who was into perhaps killed in an encounter with police, and that person had a press card, and the next day the narrative was created that a journalist has been killed in the name of terrorism, which was false, because you had somebody who was a terrorist having a press card, which was very dangerous, because then with the press card he had a lot of places access to. There were two journalists who were caught in Chhattisgarh, and that time Chhattisgarh was ruled by Congress, not by BJP. Those two journalists were caught because they were extorting, they were blackmailing somebody. So that person filed a complaint, and those two journalists were caught. Now, if two journalists were caught because they were involved in blackmailing or were involved in extortion, are you going to say that there is no freedom of press in India? But that is the bizarre level where things have been taken when it comes to defining what freedom is. And you see this whole George Soros thing, what I keep on saying. George Soros, first of all, I don't believe works in unison. He is a front of who, we can all guess that thing. George Soros has pledged $1 billion to fight nationalism. I mean, if I love my country, George Soros is unhappy. What kind of society wants to build? What kind of society these wokes and want to build for the whole world? That I would hate my country, then I'm a good person. I have no connection with the family, then I'm a better person. Because once you are disconnected from the roots, from the civilizational ethos, from your culture, from your aesthetics, from your ethos, then it is very easy to mold you. Then you can be made a foot soldier of what George Soros hallucinates about how the world should be. And that is something today you find people are rejecting. People are absolutely rejecting. At least in India, we see there is a revival. The revival is something that they abhor. The revival is cultural. The revival is not religious beyond a point. The revival is purely cultural, where somebody is saying that I can be a CEO of a tech company. I can be, from one of the top, engineering colleges. I can be futuristic in my outlook in terms of technology. But why, for that purpose, I have to give up my civilizational ethos or culture? Because my culture teaches me to conserve. And my culture is the one which teaches me that don't take beyond a point. Only take what is necessary. So when it comes to conservation or climate change issues, you should be adhering to the cultural aspect of many of the Asian countries, because Asia has always taught in terms of culture what conservatism in terms of consumption is. Mindless consumption, consumption or not having any regard to conservatism is not going to help. So I think, Salvatore Babones has been one of the, you can call him an iconic writer and a researcher who questioned, the first person to question these indexes was him. And then people found out the networks as to Vijay, the one who comes out with this democracy index. Who funds him? Where does he get money from? One of the biggest, sponsors of Vijay is George Soros. Now, George Soros doesn't like India because the Indians are becoming more nationalistic, and he hates nationalism. So I think what we see, there's a story behind it. Does it mean that we have lost sense of humor? Does it mean that we don't like criticism? I think Indians are the most argumentative. I think in India, to bring a change, you need to have a lot of deliberations. I think Indians, no one loves arguments that how the Indians like it. So we are all for criticism, but don't criticize for the sake of it. And please don't assume, that Global South cannot have its own viewpoint. Just because Global South has less money doesn't mean that he's at your mercy. You don't need to think about Global South anymore. Global South has not outsourced its intellectualism to the West. It's not going to work anymore. So this is the only thing. You got to respect people. So the 4R that Prime Minister talked about in January 2003 in the Voice of Global South Summit: respect, recognize, reform, and respond. Common but differentiated responsibilities. You cannot expect a small Global South economy to invest that much on climate change finance as US is supposed to do. It cannot be 5% of GDP for everyone. Our emissions are need-based, not lifestyle-based. So that is the important thing. And because we, took a pledge, we brought African Union into G20. Many people maybe not be happy with that. So I think that there's a churning going on in Europe also, in US also. But I think the West needs to be a little more accommodative while criticizing. That's the only thing. Shweta, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, in the same summit, Prime Minister Modi also stressed on how the Global South represents 3/4 of the humanity. So, Pathikrit, before I go to Chris, I want to ask another related question about this indices. So, should India be concerned about these global indices? Like, will it be a wise strategy for India to kind of ignore them and consider them as mere noise?
No, I think first of all, if you come out with some logic, I think we are all for it. I don't think we are rejecting anything for the heck of it. Because when I wrote this entire paper, I gave reasons why there's a lot of suspicion about your intent. You had access to information. You just didn't want that information. You wanted somebody to opinionate about India who you knew would be biased against India. That is the problem. Now, let me tell you one thing. I just want to show something in page number 13 of the paper. I've written, in October 2022, Wall Street Journal came out with a full-page ad. The ad said, Magnitsky's 11. I will request you if you can put up the link when you put it up in YouTube. This ad came up in Wall Street Journal, had photographs of India's finance minister, had photographs of India's Solicitor General, had photographs of top Supreme Court, judges. Why? Because a person called, if I have to just take his name was Ramachandran Vishwanathan. He was involved with an organization called Devas, and there was a scam involved. This person has been designated by an Indian court as a fugitive economic offender. Wall Street Journal allowed an organization associated with this man to put up a one-pager maligning Indian heads of states and ministers at a time when Indian government representatives were about to visit the United States. Imagine if this had been done in India against the American government representative just before Joe Biden was supposed to visit, what the Americans would have done. As I mentioned about, the order that was given by Tata's 470 aircraft, another 470 is in the pipeline. Few days back, Gurpatpan Singh Pannu Sikh for Justice organization. He has been designated as a terrorist in India, gave an open threat of blowing up Air India planes. And US was okay with it. But US then says, we are all against terrorism. The biggest terror attack on the aviation sector before 9/11 was in 1985, where the Air India plane was bombed, the Kanishka bombing. Have you ever heard Americans of the West talking about that? Where more than 200 people, 50 people were killed. Canadians of Indian origin. And they were okay with it. So Pannu's threats about a terror attack, and the West is fine with it, no problem. This is the double standard, Swetaji. It is not anymore the government of India, it is the common man asking that, okay, this is what, fine, we don't need you. The fact that the common man is saying we don't need you, neither we need your product nor we need your sermons, is what is rattling the West even more. And that is what has become an enigma for them, that there was a time when we used to publish something in the Western newspapers, or an NGO used to write, or a Western educated elite intellectual writing something must be accepted by the ordinary Indians. How dare they start thinking for themselves? That is what the problem that they face today, because Indians have started thinking for themselves. Not that we don't have our own set of problems. We have. And we are not saying we are better than you, you are worse, we discriminate against you, you are not needed. But all we are saying is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. You know, if there is one earth, you need to treat everyone as a family. Prime Minister or the government of India never said that the war between Russia and Ukraine is justified. He has often stated this is not an era of war. But was efforts made by United Nations to prevent the conflict? Is there a conflict resolution mechanism, a conflict preventive mechanism for United Nations? No, there is no. Which means that you want conflicts to continue, otherwise the military-industrial complexes will not make money. And that is where, when we say that this is not an era of war, not many people are happy. What have they done with Pakistan? Tell me, you know, for all the terrorism they have done. They blamed India. I'll tell you why this revulsion have come out of India suddenly, because it was a pent-up anger for a long time, I think. For 30-40 years, a dictatorial Pakistan was favored by democratic Europe over a democratic India. A democratic India was pinned down in favor of a dictatorial Pakistan. We have seen that all. Had it not been, God forbid, we are against terrorism. Had it not been for 9/11, had it not been for 26/11, where Western peoples lost their lives in India in the 26/11 terror attack, things would not have been changed. Even today, under the 1326 or something like that, the UN resolution under which people get sanctioned for being designated as a terrorist, is because of the connection with Al Qaeda. It's not because somebody is Lashkar-e-Toiba. It's because somebody has targeted India. It's because of their connection with Al Qaeda, and because Al Qaeda had attacked the United States. It cannot be that one said, you know, this good terrorist, bad terrorist culture that has gone on for a long time. So I think, Shwetaji, my last statement, many people don't realize and don't know in the West, again with due respect, that when it comes to fighting terrorism in Kashmir, a significant number of those who lost their lives fighting for India against Pakistani terrorism were Indian Muslims in the security forces.
True.
It's not a religious war beyond the point, it's a cultural war between Pakistan and India. They don't realize it. I have a list of names of such, and they are amazing. There was a person, he was a lance corporal, if you put it in English, in Indian Army, and his name was Aurangzeb. So when he was returning home, he was abducted by these Pakistan-based terror organizations. And there was a video of a person putting a gun on his head and asking that, were you involved in that operation? And he did not blink. He did not get scared. He looked at the terrorist at the face and said, yes, I did it. And then he was shot dead. And you know what his father said? Aurangzeb's father said that I have 4 other sons. I want them also to join the army. These are the stories that West does not show. And then his commanding officer took a vow that for Aurangzeb, I'll ensure that in, I don't remember the number of hours, that I will ensure that those terrorists get killed. And they made it. They killed. And his brothers actually joined the army. And there are innumerable such stories. Look at the transformation of Kashmir today. Why is it that the West then still continue to write against what the government of India did in terms of Article 370 amendments? Back to you, Shweta.
Yes, absolutely, Pathikrit, what you said is so correct, and we are constantly, fighting the narrative war. Chris, if I can pose the same question to you, all these global indices that they are pinning down India. So should India be concerned about them? Will it be a wise strategy for India to kind of ignore them and not pay too much heed to them?
Well, I think what India's doing is working hard in other areas and other fields. It's been seen as whether it likes it or not, it feels like it's rising as a power, and nations are now looking towards India for leadership. And you see that in the region with Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, but then you also see it in other areas. In Africa, you're seeing it, and in Southeast Asia, you're seeing it, where people are wanting Japan and India to step up and to help provide a bit of a guarantee for their security. So I think these indices ultimately, as Prathikrit was saying, they become meaningless. We shouldn't completely ignore them. As a democracy, you want to be seen to be developing and moving on certain fronts. However, what India's doing in many fields will drown out all those noise ultimately, I think. And I think as a new generation of journalists in the West are coming on board, I think what we'll see is a real change in the coverage of India as we see on defense. Prathikrit was right. On defense, there's a lot of people in the United States who see that India is a real partner. So you're beginning to see the national security transformation in the United States. Yes, not on the Khalistan issue. I agree on when it comes to sort of dissidents and terrorism, we are massively behind, and we aren't. It should be that India's security is our security for any kind of strategic partnership. We aren't seeing that in certain places, so that needs reform. And the West have generally lagged behind when it comes to problems with terrorism. We had a 20-year global war on terrorism that was coming out of Pakistan, and yet we remodeled the Middle East, and yet Pakistan is still the same Pakistan. We didn't sanction Pakistan for its behavior, which I think was very badly done. So all these problems going ahead, the indices, I don't think are going to be a big problem for India, because India's moving forward on so many fronts, and it'll drown it out, and it's just background noise, to be honest.
Thank you, Chris.
I just wanted to add one thing, Raji, if you permit. So if you look at this ad that was put up in, this was in one of the Spanish newspapers. They wanted to show India's growth story, and look at what they put up. There was a snake charmer. Okay, so then you see they wanted to show, how
the New York Times article, yeah.
And then there was they mocked how India, the population, in terms of population, it has almost reached or crossed the Chinese population. The Chinese have a bullet train, and this is how India is. So today what has happened is that it does hurt, and so there is reciprocation. I want to say one thing in the end. In India, the definition of happiness. I mean, as an Indian, you can relate a lot to it. Beyond a point, money has little to do with happiness. So even if you go to an extremely modest family with very limited means, even if you go to that family's home uninvited, even the family will ensure that you would have a meal with them. Okay, so beyond the point, because we treat the it's equally as yours. I will not say it's mine and not yours, because culturally, you are as much Indian as I am. So the concept of happiness to be defined only by per capita GDP is not going to work anymore. You can find a family in India with modest means being far more happy than somebody with $1 million and still thinking of having suicidal thoughts. So it's an enigma that needs to be understood. That's why Prime Minister keeps on talking about sharing. There's a concept called Antodaya. The yojanas in India, the word Antodaya is used. Antodaya means the last man standing should get as much benefit as the first man in the queue. So your entire approach, and that's why you see the poorest of Indians who never had access to capital today had become self-reliant. Those who had not access to having a basic toilet or a house or a or an LPG cylinder, you have empowered almost say 30 to 40 crore people. Today they are contributing productively towards the economy, and that's why we have become the fifth largest economy, on the verge of becoming a $5 trillion economy very soon. So does it mean, as Chris, you also asked Chris about, do we take these indexes seriously? We do take, and that's why the counters are coming. It's not that we do not ignore, but I think beyond the point, today it is like you cry, that the wolf is coming. You have said it so many times that today, even if you say something genuine, people don't take it seriously anymore because you have been stamped as biased. But as a country, internally, there's a lot of introspection, a lot of things that constantly happen. Even as we work closely with the government on many occasions, personally, when I have said things on television, that these are the changes that should happen in the government in terms of policies. And I can assure you on most of the occasions, we have seen those changes happen. So we are not that whatever government does, no one will question. It's not like that. Changes are happening. But criticism has to be constructive. That constructive approach, I think West beyond the point has lost. I think they need to reinvent for their good as well. Shweta, thank you.
Thank you, Pathikrit ji. Absolutely, we are looking for constructive approaches and a good lasting relationship with the West. As Prime Minister Modi said, that the whole world is one family. And Indians truly believe that. This topic has so many questions, but I just want to end it with this. Sorry, one last question to you, Prathikrit ji. In your report, in the end, you say that India has never engaged in throwing dirt on other countries, right? But do you think it's time for India to turn the gaze? Because they sometimes say that attack is the best defense.
Well, I think one of the top ministers hinted at something like this. I will not name that. We have never engaged our think tanks have always been inward looking. We have never tried to poke in any other country's internal affairs. Wherever we could have, we have actually helped. We still look at West for a lot of things in terms of we respect the West. We respect. But it's also true if you see again, the bipartisan thing or the fact that we are not looking everything from a partisan approach. If you see Dr. Shashi Tharoor's speech, I think at Oxford, when you talk about a country which has been looted to the extent of $45 trillion been taken from this country, the fact that that country in less than 70 years' time has become the fifth largest economy, still remains a vibrant democracy, the fact that it is constantly evolving in an environment where it has been consistently denied technology, from cryogenic engine to supercomputers to everything. It worked hard to make them, where you have pushed it to the corner time and again, saying that either you are with us or against us. It still keeps the mind cool. And with all the challenges that it has, it continues to go ahead. But I think it's not in our ethos to play those games. However, I think beyond the point, I think this is a discussion going on in television channels also, that if Canadian government can promote the Khalistani thing, why should we not do the same about Quebec? Why should we not talk about the independence of Scotland? I mean, how would it feel if tomorrow we prop up a bunch of people and stand in front of the British embassy that we are all for Scotland's independence? It will certainly not look good, because that's not the way we behave. But perhaps somewhere you may see on several things. If you see what happened with Maldives recently, I think Maldives took it for granted. Come what may, you can do anything to the Indians, they will not hit back. To the government, he did not hit back, but the common man, they've started cancelling. So Maldives' economy, beyond the point, is almost gone. I don't want to say anything bad, but they were playing the game on behalf of China. Today, as the Chinese generally do, they have said, okay, we are going away, because they didn't help Sri Lanka either when they were in a deep crisis. But so what I'm saying is that the policy of the government of India may not change, but average Indians have started taking things very seriously. Does it mean that the West is enemy? Does it mean the Chinese are enemy? No, it doesn't work that way. But I think you would find over the next 5-10 years a lot more think tanks being very more critical and questioning certain things about the West, which for a long time only the West had the prerogative to ask the rest of the countries. Back to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Pathikrit. We do hope for a better society overall in the world through all these changes. Krish, would you have any concluding thoughts before we move towards conclusion?
Yeah, I think basically what we need to do in the West, and I mean it works both ways. Ultimately, a dialogue works on respect, and I think respect is about understanding each other and understanding each other's fears and understanding each other's strengths. And I think the West needs to do a heck of a lot of work on that front. And I think it is chafing a lot of nations, not just India. We are chafing a lot of nations, and we're putting a lot of people's backs up when I think that the solution is a fairly easy one. It's just about putting respect out there and being more humble. So I think as we sort of all move forward, I think Pathikrit made the good assumption. There's India hasn't had the soft power all through and that's because mainly in the Cold War we built up soft power in all these human rights organizations to go out on the offensive, to go out on and be assertive and on the attack. India just doesn't have that capability. So I think he's right in as we move into dialogues with the West, and we are in each other's pockets a lot more. I think India does have the right to be more assertive on issues where it says like racism in the West, Hinduphobia, that kind of thing. It does need to be a bit more assertive, and I think it will chafe. But as part of the dialogue, you've got to have adult conversations, and I think whether it be on terrorism, radical Islam, or whatever, you've got to be able to have those adult conversations, sometimes in public, sometimes in private. And I think the traffic's been too one way over the years, and that's going to change as India rises. And I think that's a positive thing for the rest of the world and a positive thing for us and for India.
That's absolutely, Chris. So on that note of constructive approaches and a more balanced world, let's conclude. I mean, it was definitely an insightful and engaging session with lots of food for thought. We thank our panelists, Chris and Pathikrit, for sharing their knowledge and deep insights with us today. I mean, we can just say that the demonization of India and its depiction as a fascist nation is a matter of concern for all Indians, and the diaspora alike, and that is the reason we are all here today to discuss and dissect. We hope that things improved, and like Chris mentioned, it is a more balanced purview. So thank you again all for joining us today. FISI UK, we endeavor to talk and discuss such subjects through webinars like these, various spaces, events, and much more. So do follow us and stay tuned. And we hope you found the session useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.